A very warm welcome to Fireside Chats. In today's episode, we are looking at the subject of pure speech. If this is of interest to you, I invite you to sit tight and spend the next half an hour with us, where I have the opportunity to interview Sister Denise, who has been practicing Rajyoga Meditation for over 4 decades. In this series, we look at a variety of topics surrounding spirituality, what it is not, and how it impacts on your life, your consciousness. We particularly focus on how one can deepen your relationship with God and how you can make this relationship more meaningful and real to you. Sister Denise, thank you so much for joining us, and a very warm welcome to today's show.
Thank you.
Pure speech. What on earth is pure speech?
Well, it's a very important component of successful relationships, so it's good that we're talking about it today. Pure speech means that what you say is true, it is pleasant, it is beneficial. Even the tone of voice is pleasant, harmonious, and I think it's also important, because speech is our medium of communication on the whole, it's important not to have any emotions going on so that your words and the meaning of what you're saying comes across without getting distorted by the energy of an emotion.
Sister Denise, in terms of speech, our speech is influenced by the way we feel, our own negativity, our past, the way people who raised us speak. Do you come to a point where you re-look at the way you speak and then ask yourself whether this is working for you or not?
I think you do, because as you rightly said, we're very influenced by the people who raised us. And we will always, they use this term mother tongue. And so that's not just only your language, but it includes everything about how you grew up. The vocabulary, the tone of voice, the type of things you say or don't say. It's quite a large subject, verbal communication. And along with verbal communication, non-verbal communication, that's another kind of speech. Then there's body language. And I think that in speech we have to include anything that's written down. One of the interesting phenomena that we quite often see is that there's a big difference between the way someone speaks and the way that same person says the same thing in writing. You would think that there wouldn't be any difference, but there's a vast difference. So that means we have to pay attention on our written word, our spoken word, and I think one of the instruments that helps us is when we're recorded and we hear back, because very often we're very surprised, because how I sound like from the inside of my head may be very different from how it sounds when I hear the recording getting played back. One thing that has been said is, if you tell the truth with anger, it's not the truth anymore. And I think people won't really hear the truth, they'll hear the anger. I think also in our verbal communication, the words, the tone, the feeling, the eyes, the body language, everything has to line up in order for a person to actually receive the communication and to believe it as well.
Sister Denise, why a pure speech? And what do you mean by the word purity in this context?
There are some symbols that we work with in Raj Yoga. We talked in other episodes about the swastika and the lotus, and there's one that is the symbol of pure speech, which is the conch. And you find in different religions this importance given to blowing the conch, or in Judaism the shofar, which is the ram's horn. It is said, that if you hold the conch, it means that you have mastered the art of pure speech. That means what you say is true, it's relevant, it's meaningful, it's kind, it is not going to do any damage. It is of importance to the person who's listening, and maybe even you can say something which resonates down through the ages because of how impactful those words are.
Yes, Denise, there are times in our lives where we have to communicate something that's hard. I'm speaking about a parent who has to correct the negative behavior of a child, a person in the position of authority who has to deliver some nasty comments to an employee who has not been carrying their weight. There are various situations in life where the message is bad, and that's not the fault of the one delivering the message. How do you bring kindness in that? Because there's nothing kind about the situation.
What is taught in Brahmakumaris is, first of all, you prepare the ground.
What does that mean?
That means that you tell the person you like them very much, they're a very good person, so that they are, open to hear what you have to say, and they know that you are coming to them in a benevolent way. And then when you have established that rapport, you say there's something I need to talk about, and that is, and you have to put it in such a way that the person can hear it, accept it, and be willing to do something about it, and that the rapport is maintained. So it's not really that you have something nasty to say to someone. You set up the situation, and then you say the thing which may be hard, but it's not unkind. And so that is a skill which is taught as part of Rajyoga, and people either learn it well or they don't learn it well, but it's a very valuable skill to acquire. And I think that also it involves being prepared to take the time to sit with a person, to establish the rapport. I think also to have frequent communication is good, because then you're sustaining the rapport, and that person knows that you're in a flow with each other, but there's something important that has to be worked out. And I think that if you do it skillfully, it will, the message will pass, and the person will receive it. And there may be a little bit of a change of vibration as the person receives the fact that they can't get away with what they thought they could get away with, or it was noticed and can't do that. But you see, very quickly the rapport is re-established, So it's all about really being a skillful communicator. Sometimes you have to inform somebody of the death of a loved one. That is also a very difficult one to do. I think one of the good things that we have when you have a spiritual community is you have a number of people who will demonstrate different aspects of the teaching in your interaction with them, and you will learn this is a good way to communicate such and such things.
As a Denise, it's become extremely commonplace to hear people use obscenities and vulgarities as a way of self-expression. I have two questions. How does that impact on what you just said, if you're the speaker? And secondly, how do you deal with that if you yourself do not swear?
Well, I think that it's understood that if you are wanting to develop yourself spiritually and practice spirituality, it doesn't suit to engage in obscenities and swearing and so on, because these are attributes of what we might call body consciousness or whatever. What I have noticed is that if you are in that consciousness where the communication is using language which is kind, beautiful, suitable, and not full of obscenities, you're also setting the tone, and then the other people who are interacting with you will be much less inclined, or even will stop doing that, you know.
There's the expression to be brutally honest. Is it ever okay to hurt somebody's feelings in the name of honesty?
Well, you can be brutally honest. You can have something called tough love. Tough is not the same as brutal. Sometimes you have to confront a person, but you need skill in confronting them, and brutality doesn't involve that much skill. When people use the term brutally honest, they're actually not meaning brutality at all. They're meaning that they want to be clear and straight about what they have to say, and in the vernacular they use the word brutally honest, and there's a lot of uses of language which don't have much to do with the actual meaning of the word. So I think it's more something like that. But to be able to say to a person, look, this has come to my attention that you did this, 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 and this. What do you have to say about it? Okay. And here's the evidence, and, you know. Because confrontation has to happen. But the thing is that it's better if you can set up the communication in such a way that the people don't go on the defensive. Then they're much more likely to work with you to say, okay, you know, this has happened, now what are we going to do about this?
In the country in which I live, there's an expression that that which is filled in the heart flows out of the mouth. Okay? So is speech about speech, or does every word that comes out of your mouth have something to say about what's going on inside of you?
Well, I was mentioning earlier that when you say something at a time when you are emotionally charged or in the midst of an emotional turmoil, what people will hear is not necessarily what you say, but they'll hear all that emotional turmoil, and they will say, oh, this person's in emotional turmoil. I have no idea what they said. So whatever is in your heart will definitely come out of your mouth, but then you have to see. I think sometimes there are occasions where you need to really calm down your emotions before you can permit yourself to speak, because if you don't do that, what you have to say is going to cause damage, or not going to be understood, or taken in, you know, a very negative way. So as far as possible, when you're speaking, your emotions have to be refined. I mean, if you are in a state of intense feeling and you're speaking from that truth, that is something that touches the heart of others. But that's a kind of a pure emotion. And if you don't have that kind of feeling, what you say may fall flat. So, you know, there are many components to the communication of what you want to say, and sometimes what you have to say is so important that the importance is carried on the intensity of feeling that you have about that thing.
Okay. So Denise, how does one teach oneself the skill of speaking so that you are properly understood? Because the type of speech that you're referring to is a learned skill. It does not come naturally to everybody. Actually, pure speech is something that comes naturally to very few. Okay, so how does one make the transition from, the way you used to speak on to what you just described? And the reason I'm asking this is because most people carry what they learn from their childhoods throughout their lives. I know someone who says, and it means 5 words, and that's his way of speaking. And there's nothing wrong with his intellect, but that's the way he communicates. So the type of speech that you're referring to is a learned skill. How do you go about teaching yourself this?
One of the things that I work with is called dialogue. And in that there are rules of communication that I find particularly helpful. And I call it no gas. G-A-S-S. Really avoid generalization, accusation, speculation, and speeches. So if you're making a generalization, it's unlikely to be true. All Canadians play ice hockey. No. It's many, but it's never going to be all. You always, you never. Can't possibly be true. There has to be at least one occasion when you don't. Accusation. It's not a good way to go. Better than an accusation is to say, when you bang the door in my face, I feel slighted. So that you're not accusing the person of doing something bad, but you're letting the person know how you feel when they behave in a certain way, you see, which is a much more effective message for that person to receive the full import of what you want to communicate. And speculation is something people do a great deal. It's a tremendously bad habit of thinking and speaking, which uses words like, oh, well, you probably did this because something, or, oh, definitely that person meant this by what they did. You have no idea, So, and then speeches, what I mean by speeches is, you say the thing again and again and again because you're trying to get a reaction. And you're trying to get somebody to accept what you're saying, and they may not. They have every right not to, So these are very common, you can say, mistakes of communication or bad style of communication. And so in the different programs that we do around spiritual education, to develop the skills of good communication and be able to actually let somebody know what you mean and feel that you've been heard is very important. Heard.
H-E-A-R-D.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because very often people say, I feel that you haven't heard me. And one of the reasons for this, and I've experienced it myself, I will say something to someone and they'll repeat it back to me that's nothing to do with what I just said. And so I've thought about this, why is that? And mostly it's because of prejudice. That people have assumptions. If a person is dressed up in a white sari, then they will say this, this, and this. Well, excuse me, that's not true. That's an assumption. But listen to what I'm saying. Tell me what you heard. Are we on the same page? So another, I think, quite good, helpful way of making sure that you have been heard is to ask the person to repeat back to you what you just said. You know, or I will dictate a letter to somebody, and unless they take it down and write it in my words, but they write it in their words, it'll be a completely different style with a different tone, with a different impact. And then I'll say, no, I want you to write this letter in these words because that's how I want it to go out, you know.
You touched on this earlier, but this is such a sore subject for many that I think it necessitates further discussion. Is it ever okay to speak when you are in anger? And if your answer is no, what do you do with your anger? And bearing in mind that you need to talk, you need to communicate.
I think that you have to qualify this word anger. You may feel very strongly about something and be in absolute control over what you're saying while feeling strongly. That's not anger. If you are out of control and all sorts of things come out of your mouth because you're out of control, there's no point because you're not communicating. You're exploding, you know. So if you want to explode, that's nice, but it's not communication, because communication is a two-way thing. If you feel really strongly about something, okay, say what it is, and then we'll hear what it is, and then we'll give you a response. And so whether something is okay or not, I think you have to evaluate in terms of, does it work? I mean, if you want to terrorize somebody by blasting at them with your voice, that's called verbal abuse. And all you're trying to do is terrorize them. So what's okay about that? You know, if you want to tell somebody, don't shut the door with a bang, you could say that. You don't have to explode at them.
Okay.
Because when you do explode at them, you don't have communication. You just have an explosion with people saying, I think I'd better leave now.
Okay. Sister Denise, there are many to whom communication doesn't feature high on their agenda at all. I know personally many people for whom communication is simply a means to an end. Okay? And I find that strange because, well, communication is important to me. How does... what message do you have for people who've been criticized in the past that they're poor communicators, and how does one modify one's behavior so that you become an effective communicator?
Well, you're right. There's many people who are aware that I really am not a good communicator. I need to learn this, and there are you know, people who teach good communication. And as I said before, within the teachings of Raj Yoga, this symbol of the conch implies that learning how to communicate and use of pure speech and all of this is a very important component if you want to be a success as a human being. So it's a topic, it's a subject that is a very important one to become skilled at. Yes.
Speech itself does say something about you as an individual. How do you bring your spirituality into your speech?
When you're saying something, as you mentioned earlier, what is in your heart is coming out of your mouth. What is in your head is also coming in out of your mouth. And if your head and your heart are in balance, which is an attribute of spiritual progress, then what will come out of your mouth will be intelligent, sensitive, meaningful, deep, important, useful. It'll be a jewel. And so it is said in India that let there be jewels coming out of your mouth or flowers. So jewels are valuable words. Flowers are beautiful, loving, kind words. And then what you should not send out of your mouth is stones. You know, stones means words that hurt people's feelings, words that are harsh. Your karma through words is real, you know. Whatever you say, how you say it, whatever is the motivation, etc., it's a karma and you will get the fruit of it. So very important to take time to think about how you communicate verbally, how you communicate in the written way, because it's going to make a huge difference to your success in any of your endeavors. And also, I think, how you receive the verbal communications of other people. That's the other side of it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Denise, for
Thank
your
you.
words of wisdom. Thank you for joining us for this half hour. I would invite you to sit with these thoughts for a few days, to ask yourself honestly, are you an effective communicator and are you easy to understand? So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Goodbye.